And well, thank you very much for coming today. Today I wanted to I'm sort of excited to hear that this is the first inaugural meetup for the Barcelona Jenkins area meetup. So I hope, one of the organizers would tell you more about how, this meetup is going to continue. But I happen to be visiting the area, so I thought it'd be great if I have an opportunity to speak, and they were very kindly hosting me. So today I wanted to talk about, the Jenkins 2.0 to sort of start it off. So what became Jenkins kind of started around 2004, 5-ish. I don't exactly remember when it started, but originally it was just my hobby project on my side gig. My day job wasn't keeping me busy enough. But for the past 10 years, it has quite substantially since then. So we passed the mark of 1,000 plugins. So right now I believe we are like 1,100 plugins or so. So there are more plugins than what I can possibly keep track of. That shows the size of the community. And we also passed the... Okay, maybe it's the... I don't know what... or maybe I need to... Yeah, maybe it's easier if I stick to that one. Although during the demo, it's going to be a challenge. Okay, all right, so this is a little easier. So we passed the 100,000 installation mark. So what this means is that we have anonymous usage statistics survey inside Jenkins instances, and we can see who you're using. We can anonymously see some information about the Jenkins usage, like the size of the cluster, the plugins they have, and so on. And then so we passed the point of tracking 100,000 installations that's running long in the community. So that's really, again, it indicates how big the Jenkins became. And this installation count is still growing at about the pace of the 30% year over year. So the last year, we were at about 70,000. And this year it's 100,000. And by the time next year, we are expecting, I guess, the 130,000 installation and so on. So there are still a lot of new users coming to Jenkins, trying to sort of do more automations, developer productivity stuff, things like that. And then so that got me thinking that, so Jenkins is now 10 years old. And what is it necessary to, make it relevant for the next 10 years to come? So that was the, obviously a good thought to have at the 10-year mark. So now when I think about it, one thing I thought was that during these 10 years, the kind of things that people are looking for, kind of automation that the people are trying to do, that has changed a lot. When I started this, my goal was, I just wanted to have some place to run my builds and tests. And in those times, it was probably cutting edge to be doing the build every night. We are certainly not as ambitious as building on every commit. And then maybe, building and testing, and that was it, right? If I needed to integrate my components to my other team, I would have still done it by picking up the phone. Or if there's still a release manager who is trying to coordinate, pick up a tag from CVS, and then for us, the release is create a tag in CVS and then report it. And then, so these are the days in which version control system was the CVS. Subversion was still a new thing. And then so in the past 10 years, we kind of came a long ways, right? Whereas today, what people who are new to Jenkins, they're looking for is not just building and testing automation, but a more comprehensive. It often includes things like deployment, releases. Maybe you are trying to do the validation build for every pull request. A lot more comprehensive automation is getting done. So the kind of things, that's what people are trying to do with Jenkins. And then so the fact that there are out-of-box experience is only really catering for that kind of 10 years ago is not really sufficient. So in other words, the frontier of automations has really shifted in the past 10 years. So Jenkins, we needed to keep it up. So now when I look at on the Jenkins, like what we've been doing, well, one, for example, our pitch, the product pitch on our website hasn't really changed since the first time I wrote it on Java.net, which back then used to be like a source forge, right? So 10 years ago, it was like a source forge, but still a thing. Today, it doesn't exist anymore. And then in Jenkins, we still bundle CVS and subversion plugins, which really makes no sense for the users today, right? So, okay, when you install Jenkins, if you are 25-year-old, like install Jenkins today and then CVS, you see CVS and like you're like, what is this, right? It really just makes no sense at all. And then in the 10 years, the community has actually worked on a lot of interesting things. And later I'm going to talk about some of those. But these things are hidden behind those 1,000 plugins. And unless you know what plugins to install and how to combine them, this is a little bit like assembling a Lego block. So you get like a bucket full of blocks, but you still have to assemble it into some meaningful shape before you can start like doing CI and CD. So, so I think given those things, I feel like we felt like, it's the right time to push the Jenkins 2.0. And for the project that's currently on 1.639, which means like in a continuous 640 releases every week since its inception. This is a kind of a big thing for us. So there are several major goals that we are trying to achieve in this. So the one is that we really want to sort of position the Jenkins project as something that's really for the continuous delivery, not just the continuous integration. And by which what I mean is, the people are using Jenkins to do a lot more automation than just build and test. So we wanted a website to explain that and then talk about those kind of things as a primary use case. And today, a lot of users new to Jenkins still have to discover how to do these more comprehensive automations or pipeline by looking at the Google or Stack Overflow or things like that. So we wanted to make it easier. Now, another part is, we wanted to revisit the out-of-the-box product experience of Jenkins. So I mentioned earlier that, the first time you install Jenkins, you get the CVS plugin and Subversion plugin, and that's it. It also has a number of features that I originally needed when I was back, working at some microsystems. But nowadays, people are not really using some parts of Jenkins. So we wanted to kind of move it out of it, and then instead add more things that the people are really relying on. And also, it's a lot of development has been focused more on plugin side, right? So the typical contributors in the community, the core is kind of like a big piece, and then it's also a little bit scary to touch because it impacts so many people. So they tend to write their own plugins and move on. And then, so what that means is things in the core that the people rely on every day tends to be unattended. So my go-to pet peeve is when the build fails, the first thing often people look at is like a console log. Like you want to see the end of the log file to see what went wrong. So it makes sense to make that very easily accessible. But and then so in some other CI software, like say for the failed build, the last 20 lines or so, the console output gets promoted right up to the top page. And then so things like that, it's really obvious thing to do now that you think about it, but we haven't done it. So we wanted to improve those parts, like a user experience part of Jenkins. And while doing all these things at the same time, we wanted to keep the ecosystem, which makes Jenkins great, which is, all this vibrant community writing all these plugins, people who are helping each other in IRC. And then so to do, and then so that's sort of like my general, the boundaries, the general goals that we are trying to achieve with Jenkins. And then so when we say it's 2.0, right? So this major version number upgrade had some connotations, like it's something usually scary to upgrade and all. But I think given that we are trying to do these things, I think the 2.0 sends a clear signal that we are really trying to shift the focus of the software. So what we are trying to aim for is that back in September, I announced this proposal and the plan publicly. And then since then, the community has a lot of discussion about various parts. So there's a number of email threads in the dev list that goes more than 70 email long. So naturally, a lot of people are interested in this. And then I've been pitching and selling and explaining why we think we should do it. And then so this conversation still continues. So I put it now. That's part of what I would love to hear from you guys is if what I'm pitching here makes sense. And then we need to sort of we sort of slowly started actually executing on the actual implementation work of 2.0. Some of the efforts I'm going to talk about is already underway. Some other things that still needs to be done. And then so hopefully, during this execution period, we're going to create the 2.0 branch. And then all these changes will be landing in there. We're going to post the weekly binaries or the RCs and snapshots so that the people can try out what's in there. At the end of it, we hope to have, So we want to basically create the 2.0 ready. And at the end of it, we set aside some time to kind of go through at least key plugins to make sure that the plugins are really compatible and then tells the right story that we want 2.0 to tell. And then hopefully, since this is a community project, I don't really get to dictate time. And you know what it's like for developers and estimating the timeline. So with that caveat, we are trying to, hopefully we get to release this maybe the end of March-ish time frame. And as soon as we release the 2.0, we like to move the community over to, the 2.0 line as opposed to 1.x. So we need to, we intend to basically drop 1.x development at that point. And then everything in Jenkins will basically become 2.0. So the things that I'm trying to be careful about, since it's kind of difficult to organize a community of distributed people who often haven't even met each other. So one thing I'm trying to make sure is that this doesn't become I'm trying to avoid scope creep, basically, like making sure that this doesn't become like everything that somebody wanted, right? So those projects will basically become impossible to complete. So that means like we have to kind of aggressively cut the scope down. So some of the changes that we really like to have, like more fundamental architectural changes and so on, we are trying to sort of push it out from 2.0 into perhaps at some point in the future. And then likewise, I really need to avoid the situation with, let's say, Python 2 and Python 3 situations. In other words, if the upgrade is disruptive, then that would really scare users, right? So if the people start feeling like, upgrading to 2.0 means like my Jenkins might break horribly and I might have to fix everything, and then they are not going to do it. And then so that's something I need to avoid. And then so I'm really aiming for, let's say, I don't know, what's a good example? Maybe Java 7 to Java 8 kind of upgrade, right? If you know what I mean. Your program will keep working, your data will still remain intact, but you get a lot of new features and functionality. It's basically what I'm aiming for. And then so to avoid disrupting the disruptive upgrade, I think it means it's also not breaking plugins, at least not intentionally. So there are some of the changes that we are planning, like a UX and UI related things, are more ambitious. And then so there's a chance that some of the plugins that improperly copied some things from the core might break. But we did set aside some time toward the end to make sure that the important plugins are fully compatible. And then also we plan to spend some time in the core to retain compatibility. But at least we are basically setting the goal to ourselves that, let's not break everything at the same time. And likewise, people spend a lot of effort in their Jenkins home. Like these jobs and plugin combinations and so on, they are meticulously maintained. So we want to make sure that when people upgrade to 2.0, their jobs and their bills remain intact. And that's also very important for us. And then what that means is it pretty much means we really can't do any massive internal plumbing changes. So we are really trying to focus on the user experience, the new functionality that doesn't have to break anything that exists today as a key part of 2.0. And yes, I guess I already mentioned that means we shouldn't be focusing on internals, but really more focusing on the user-facing part of Jenkins. So what that means, I think, is the Jenkins 2.0 is somewhat limited scope in terms of more architectural changes, but adding more, like evolutionarily adding more functionality that the community has already done, and then create more sort of curated experience that presents you the best, I guess, the best face of Jenkins, the things that a lot of people has proven successful. So that's the kind of 2.0 we are aiming for. So given that context, yes, so there are, I think, the three main ingredients in here that we are trying to do. So the one is the messaging changes. So and the second one is, yes, to provide the functionalities out of the box to make sure that it caters to the continuous delivery needs, the kind of broader automation that the people are trying to do. And then finally, there's some targeted internal limited programming changes that are really necessary to increase our velocity. So especially, for example, in this release, we are trying to focus on UX. So we needed to add some additional plumbing so that the plugins can provide great user experience. So what are we? Let's look at some more details here. So in terms of the messaging, so we are primarily looking at the big website changes. So we are actually proposing to drop the CI.off. Jenkins. So if we are trying to pitch the message that the Jenkins is not just a CI tool anymore, then having a CI in the domain name is kind of inconvenient. So I tried I actually tracked down the guy who owns the Jenkins.org. Turned out to be some guy on Ferrari, and so he wasn't interested in selling the domain to a measly project like ours. But we were able to find a guy that would be able to get the Jenkins.io. So I think that's where we are trying to go. We wanted to show the more up-to-date feature listing page. So, if you go to any product, the first thing you see is a quick introduction of the major parts of the software. And then that's where you get the sense of what the software does. If you look at the same page in Jenkins today, it talks about like a replacing cron or Java Web Start. Again, they're not the kind of thing that Parth users care about. So, we need to really sort of fix that. And the more authoritative and curated getting started guide is important as well. So today, yes, once you install Jenkins, it actually does tell you to create jobs, but that's it. And then you don't know what job means, or the UI would say create items. So there are a lot of things. We want to help people get through the first hour or two until they get to some point of satisfaction. I think helping people through that is really important. And we also want to create more themed, what we think of like a solution pages. So let's say, so you've been to DockerCon and you felt like, I'd like to know what Jenkins can do with Docker. And then as a project, we'd like to tell you that, there are these 5 different use cases that you can do with these plugins. That's the kind of best practices that collectively we, the community, would recommend. And we want to make those things much easier to find, as opposed to asking individual users to go to the Stack Overflow to find out what's available there. Fixing the blog. Another, I think the big one is the plugin directory. So the plugins are by far the crown jewels of Jenkins, right? So pretty much everything you want to do in Jenkins, you need to install some plugins. And so finding the right, providing a great experience, finding the right plugin is kind of important. We haven't really, what we have is on the Jenkins wiki, which just lists all the plugins. And then I created that when there are only 20 plugins. If you only have 20 plugins, having a list is okay. But at the 200 plugins, it's clearly not working. And now we have more than 1,000 plugins. So it's really not helping people find the right plugins. So we wanted to revisit some of those. So this would be a good point to. So this work is not completed yet, but there's some mock-up prototypes that I can show you. The guy who's working on this is thinking about what have I done? Yeah, so he's looking at more the App Store-like experience that shows you, we wanted to get the ratings, the icons, the installation currents, and things like that. And then, so this is being, something like this is being considered. We still need to build more mock-ups and so on. But I'd imagine many of you here has already seen the plugin manager in Jenkins. So I hope you all agree that, whatever it is, it's going to be a massive improvement over what we have today, right? So, I think, did again? Oh, well. And by the way, feel free to ask any questions in the middle. So like American people, they don't hesitate asking questions. Like I don't need to say anything and they'll just interrupt me left and right. In Asia, like in Japan or China, like people they very quietly listen to, and then I feel nervous if I'm really if I'm communicating them well. So I thought the Spaniards are generally more outward people, but maybe not. But feel free to. Okay. Yeah. Oh, yes. So now I remember. So to encourage people to ask questions, I brought some T-shirts. So see, so if you ask questions, so we have 8 T-shirts. So I think you need to start asking questions before they run out. So how about that? Yeah. Okay. So yes. What was I saying? Right. So yes. So better plugin directory be one of those. I guess have to be careful not clicking twice. To deliver this kind of new website, I think today we actually use Drupal to run our website, and frankly, to keep it properly secure and up to date has been painful enough, and it's also making allowing the community to contribute content on Drupal hasn't really been easy, and so we are taking the opportunity to swap the runtime stack to some static site generator. And this work, I think we are just about the cusp of launching the prototype site for the next release. And also the community has been by far the communicating. So Jenkins project has this huge wiki. And then that's where people write these contributed contents. But if you are going with the static site generation backed by source code in GitHub, then maybe we can eventually retire wiki in the favor of the same scheme. And that I think could be really handy, and we don't have to fight spams anymore that way too. And the Confluence is another kind of like a big thing we kind of have to babysit, and it's been sucking up a lot of time. Like I've been personally upgrading Confluence all the time, and let me tell you, that is not a fun experience. And so that's another thing we might be able to do. And in terms of the out-of-the-box experience, we wanted to, one important addition that we are doing is this initial setup wizard. So we wanted to, the first time when the user installs Jenkins, we wanted to present a list of recommended plugins that they can start with. We wanted to help people set up the security so that it's kind of locked down from the beginning, and things like that. So that's another thing that's actually getting worked on. And here, if I stop this one. So this is also still work in progress. And then so this is kind of like the first time you install Jenkins, you see this the landing page, and then you can install the just recommended plugins, or if you don't want to, if you want to start lean, then you can start with just customized plugin experience. If you go to this recommended plugins and you see some curated list of what we think is a reasonable starting point. And then again, so this is also built on top of a different front-end plumbing. So, I think you see a lot more interactivity, a bit like it looks and feel a bit more modern compared to the traditional classical Jenkins part. So those things are being worked on. So that would allow you to basically, get right off the gate, you can get more reasonable, sensible set of plugins to start with, and then so you don't have to, you don't have to build your own thing. And then I guess that's going to install your set of plugins, and then we still need to do more work around security and so on. But that's the general idea. So and then we are also planning to work on a broader UI UX refresh. So there's a team of guys who did, I think, about this time last year, did a massive CSS overhaul in Jenkins. So those of you who have been using Jenkins for the longest time, you might have remembered that back then it was like a blue and orangish. And then at one point it changed to the black and more flattish look. So those guys since then, like they got more familiar with the internals in Jenkins, and now they're like trying to get more trying to take on more ambitious changes. So if you actually looked at the JavaScript, the inspector inside Jenkins, you might have seen that these forms, most of the forms are laid out in the table. And then so that was really, well, that's one, not a good practice to do in general, but also more practical term. It's been making it difficult to add more interactivities and semantic markup into the page. So that's actually being planned to be fixed now. So we lay out them in more semantic manner, and that in turn allows us to add a lot more interactions, like accordions, different tabs for different sections of the configuration page. So those are also being planned. I think it's going to be an exciting change for many of the users. So those are, I guess, the UX part. The other, I suppose, and what about the functionalities, right? So the out-of-the-box experience more catered toward the continuous delivery. So for that area, so we're adding a lot of functionality that already like being built on. So workflow, actually, how many of you have heard of Jenkins workflow? Okay, well, so actually not many people, so that's great. I'm going to go in more details there. And then we are sort of adding more on top of it, and then we are now calling it the pipeline as code. And I think this is a really convincing user experience that I want to get to later. But these are sort of like a more relatively recent addition to Jenkins that I think useful for a lot of people. So I want to make sure that these functionality is available. And also we are open sourcing the workflow stage view, which is a kind of like a visualization on top of the workflow. So those things will be coming into Jenkins 2.0 by default, more or less. And then the plumbing change, the developers of the project, for the hard users of Jenkins, this out-of-the-box experience stuff isn't all that interesting. Like, I know for sure like exactly what plugin I want to install. Right? So it tends to be difficult to get developers of the project excited about things I just talked about. Well, except for UX, I suppose. And then so for more plumbing changes, when we are looking at these reinstituting some kind of policy for removing deprecated APIs. If you look at the Jenkins code base, we really try to be backward compatible. And then so you can see some deprecated APIs that's been around for like a past 5 years. And then the fact that those things are accumulating over is, it's kind of slowing us down. And then so we wanted to be a bit more aggressive about removing changes. So the current rule being considered is, well, once the API is marked as deprecated, and after, let's say, 50 releases or some fixed number of end releases, the API will disappear. And we will try to warn you that these plugins are using the old API so that you can see when some of your plugins might stop working. And then so that's coming. And I've already mentioned about this brand new front-end development method. So it kind of gets technical, but we are basically bringing a lot of toolkits and then like a tool chains from the Node.js. So now the front end, you can write the common JS modules, and that can be tested on their own, and they get packaged into Jenkins plugin and then loaded into the front end. So, we are trying to build the same kind of extensibility story we have in the back end, but all in the front end. So now some of the screenshots I showed you earlier, they're using this new stack, and the front end is all rendered in the front end by using things like handlebars and other JavaScript libraries. And then we are trying to require the servlet 3.1 for this. And then so we are going to add some more dynamic functionality that relies on these new servlet functionalities. So the one that I particularly want to do is to, a lot of Jenkins, a lot of things in Jenkins require a page reload. So the things, for example, the one that comes to my mind is like if you're watching the console output, the ball on the top is flashing while the build is going on. But even build is done, it's still flashing until you reload the page. So things like that, again, like in today's standard, it's not, that was okay in 1990s. but it's just not okay anymore. So we need to fix those things. And then that, I think the sublet 3.1 change would bring us there. So that's a kind of the overview of what we are trying to put into Jenkins to the law. But there are a few things in there that I think that it's worth more double clicking, and a few things that actually ready enough that I can talk about. Oh, great. Right. Okay. So how can people contribute to the project? So one of the things, if you're willing to hack the code, right, that's great, right? But what I wanted to sort of talk about is there are a lot more than just coding to contribute to the project. The fact that you're organizing the meetup today, that's actually creating a great opportunity for users to meet together and swap nodes. And I think from our perspective, I think that's a great way to contribute to the project. The documentation is also very important, but it often, like for people like me who know the software inside out, it's not obvious what needs to be explained, because I lost this fresh user perspective. So if somebody is still new to the project, and I'm sure like you had some moments of anger, like Jenkins just doesn't work, and this is a crappy software. And then so if you still have that kind of experience fresh in your memory, and I think that makes you a lot better writer as a new user to Jenkins. So that's another way to contribute. And then so I think there are different things we can do. And then usually the way we get in touch with these people would be either on the IRC channel or the mailing list. So, if you're interested in participating, I think that's a good way to go. And you already have a t-shirts, but if you want, yeah. Uh-huh. Uh, right. Oh, I see. Okay, so you feel that the messaging change and the software change are kind of independent, and you feel like this all the website work is a distraction that actually adding to the scope. Yeah. Well, I think I understand where you're coming from, but I also, I guess from my perspective, what I was mainly thinking about is, all these 30% of new users that's joining us every year. And then, I think the good part of making Jenkins easier is to helping these people. So that was one thing. And then also, even for very seasoned users, like if you've been using Jenkins for, I'd say a year or two, how many people feel comfortable, confident that they actually, are using it correctly, quote unquote correctly? It's not really obvious because we don't need to endorse anything, right? So it's really left up to the individual users. So I think messaging changes, as in having more documentation that help people sort of show people what's the more proven part of Jenkins, what's more canonical part of the Jenkins. I think it's actually important, just as important as functionality. So that's how I feel. Um, uh, Okay. So yeah, I think the question was, well, how does the project decide what plugins to recommend, given that there are so many different kind of development going on, right? The people who are doing like an iPhone app development need something very different from people who need, let's say, Java web app development. In the screencast, it does have a few. It does have a few sections that help you show different areas. And then over time, we are hoping to create more, I don't know, like well, better cater to different audience. So maybe we would ask you to select, they pick the one that fits your description. Like, well, I'm doing iOS development. Well, I'm doing the PHP development, and then maybe we can cater the experience better for you. But in the first reincarnation, we are not quite there yet. So we just have a set of plugins that we think is really, well, one, like a fairly broadly applicable, like I say, Git plugin, right? That's used by more than like 70% of the users. So it's probably safe to assume that's something everyone needs. So that sort of thing. Yeah. So, yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. So your point is, well, if you're willing to go for like a rating and things like that, then perhaps it also makes sense to allow people to create a custom collection of things. Like, hey, this is how I use my Jenkins, and allow people to I guess to review those or to put the star on those. And then so those are all like all the things that we thought about. But that hopefully that will come sometime in the 2.x time frame. I don't know how much can be done in the initial 2.0 launch. But yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. You're quite right that those are obvious ideas that we kind of want to get to. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So your comment was well, like when you were trying to put together a pipeline in Jenkins. Yes, you could find like a lot of like a blog post left and right on through Google, but like you don't really know. Well, like these things are all talking different things, and then as a user, like you don't really know how to go forward. You could really benefit from having some kind of like maybe a travel guide or some kind of official experience. Yeah, so that's exactly why we think we need to create these solution pages. Or that's why I think the website change is kind of important. There's a difference in people finding it through Google and somebody's blog versus something on the Jenkins website that adds more authenticity and it kind of helps people ramp up more quickly. So yeah, so that's kind of speaks to the motivation. Um, so the question was, what about the old plugins? Yes, so because it's like a kind of long tail, right? There's a lot of plugins that like it's really useful for small number of people. That's not necessarily maintained in the sense that it already does whatever the author needs to do. So it's basically completed. So one like as I was trying to be careful, the reason I spent so much slide explaining about compatibility stuff is we intend to keep those plugins still functioning. And then so long as they are not using a deprecated API, they should continue to function. But as we become more aggressive in removing deprecated APIs, some plugins will stop functioning. And then so our goal is to try to be able to give you some upfront forecast. I mean, if you're using a plugin that uses a deprecated API that's going to disappear in 30 releases, like let's say 3 months from now, you probably want to know. So I'm hoping that would be sufficient to, as a user, I understand that you want every plugin to work forever, but it's also hard for the project to keep everything working. So that's the one of the dilemma I'm trying to solve. So I don't know. What would you say, right? Do you need us to keep supporting every plugin forever? Mm-hmm. right? Yeah, yeah. And then speaking of unmaintained plugins, there's a next week. There is going to be a Jenkins Hacksgiving, which is a Japan for the Thanksgiving, and then we are trying to spend I think the 2 days of the virtual meetup, and then we have it's a sole focus of kind of merging together the plugins that seems to be overlapping or being deprecated. And then so hopefully that will create some, bit of a house cleaning, if you may. And we also recently launched the program called Adapter Plugin. So we have more explicit flag attached to a plugin whose maintainer has said, well, I need to move on, so I'm not going to work on this anymore. And we are actively looking for the people who are interested in contributing to the project, it kind of goes back to your point earlier, to be able to to see the list of plugins that's abandoned, that need to be adapted, and then you can take it under your wings to take it to the next level. So that's also our ongoing work. Yeah. Okay. Oh. So am I planning to change the API to configure Jenkins? Yes and no, which is a great leeway to pipeline as code, so maybe I should get there. So the pipeline as code is actually like a major new subsystem to Jenkins 2.0, and then to me, this is the most exciting part of the story. So I mentioned earlier that the kind of automation people are trying to do now is very different compared to the 10 years ago, right? Back then, maybe it was just a building testing, but today, a lot of people are trying to put together quote-unquote pipelines that involve maybe building and testing in different environments and run some maybe code analytics stuff, maybe run the integration test with code coverage and stuff like that. So it tends to have a lot more steps involved in it than that's just running build and test. And today, the way you can do these things in Jenkins, that basically involves turning every box in the earlier picture into a separate job and putting things together. And while it's great that it does work, it's kind of adds to a complexity, and it's I give you a sense that we are not really capturing the problem at the right level. And then so this is why, in other words, it also putting an interesting the sequencing. So let's say you need to split them out, find out the three things, and then join back to run another thing. And if you wanted to put these pieces together in some interesting ways, you also need to use a number of plugins, like parameterized trigger plugin or maybe promoted builds plugin. You might have used some of those, right? And then they all need again, the Lego block assembly. So you need to discover that these plugins are useful, and then two, you need to learn how to combine them. So that's not really optimal or helpful. So we've been working on this functionality called workflow for about a year now. And then the goal is to let you define the kind of, the pipeline I showed you earlier in just one job, which is as it should be. And not only that, you are defining that kind of configurations in code as a script, basically, in a text file. And then you can put this inside the version control system and basically apply the same techniques that you do for managing the source tree. So to me, this is so going back to your question earlier, that, is the way you are configuring Jenkins changing? And it's yes and no. And because for me, yes, because this kind of thing, it's really is a different way of configuring Jenkins job. And then no, because if you're happy with what we provide today, you can obviously keep continuing using it. We are not throwing it away, but this is a kind of catering to the different kind of audience. So I don't want to kind of read too much into this slide, but so for example, what this is trying to do is it's got this block in which it executes this section inside one build node that has a Linux as a label. And then it checks out the source code from Git repo and run the Maven and then run these two test steps in parallel. So, you can do can imagine this kind of things can be combined to do a lot of the sophisticated pipeline building. So this actually script is it's actually a DSL built on top of Groovy. So if somebody really wants to fancy, then you can create conditional statements, or loops, or variables, or functions, and so you can really create very sophisticated pipelines, or you can make your pipeline more reusable by abstracting out some common parts. So there's a lot of opportunity to use this to reduce the overhead of the Jenkins job configurations. So we are calling this the pipeline as code because we really think of it as a way of building pipeline by using same scripting and then put it inside your source tree. And then so you can do all sorts of interesting control flows. Lots of functionalities from Jenkins is available out of the box exposed to the script. So say if you wanted to run some tests that involve 3 machines at the same time, you can do those things very easily. Or if you wanted to run some cleanup actions after running a test, even regardless of whether a test succeed or fail, again, you can do that things quite easily. Or if you needed to create some section in which a particular build would exclusively occupy some resources, you can create this kind of, let's say, like a monitor synchronization with semantics. You can do that as well. So this can obviously describe simple jobs very easily, but you can also do more complex things very relatively easily. And since this is also a major new subsystem of Jenkins, we are using this opportunity to fix a lot of long-standing problems in Jenkins. So one of those is the fact that today, let's say if you have a test that runs for 4 hours, right? Which is a good problem to have. You have a lot of tests, but 4 hours is a long time. And then if Jenkins loses a connection to the slave, or if you need to restart Jenkins in the meantime, then the Jenkins will basically forget about the fact that the build is going on. And the next time when it comes back up, you have to redo it again. And then so this really, if you're using Jenkins for some time now, you know how painful this is. But not so in workflow. So in workflow, even if so you can have some build starting, and then you can restart Jenkins with new plugins, and when it comes back up, it still remembers which machine your test has been running, and it will basically connect back to it, and then it will be able to keep on going like that. So I think that's an exciting feature for hopefully many users, don't you think? No? Maybe not. Okay, so that's good. Yeah, so and then we released this at about I think the November last year. And right now we're at the point of 1.11. That's something we released, I think, the last month. So we've been making a lot of improvements to those. So we can handle these basic use cases today, but we now started thinking about, well, how can we make this even simpler to create a different user experience for Jenkins? So that's what we are trying to do. And then so instead of forcing you so this kind of script, it is great that if you're an expert in Jenkins, it's great that you can do this kind of things, but it's also still somewhat too complicated for the product developers if they are not really familiar with Jenkins, right? We needed to make this a lot more simpler for users. So what we are trying to do is, well, in most organizations, the way you do the build or test, or the way you create the pipeline is very normalized. So let's say maybe you're working on, maybe your company is producing a microservice, let's say. So there's a lot of HTTP speaking services running, and then there might be many of them, but they are all built and tested and deployed in the same manner, right? So what we'd like to let you do, what we'd like to support is, well, there's one guy in the company who actually put together this pipeline for those microservice components in the standardized way, and then define it as a reusable block, like I say. And then, if this is the ACME company, then he would basically name that process as ACME service pipeline process, right? And then it can take a few parameters for things that you need to. So maybe you need to give it a name, for example, so that the process knows where to check out the code or where to send the email to you. So if you can drill down the details, the sort of the workflow definition just down to this one line, then that's definitely something every product developer can put into their source tree, and that will work fine, right? And then so we are finally letting you do that by creating this the ability to define the custom primitives inside the workflow. So you can define these functions. If you're a Jenkins administrator in your company, you can define a function. I think I have a slide here. Yeah, you can define like a one file and then basically define this process. So it's tied by the naming convention. So if you call it HCME service, and then define the call function that define, and this body is defined in terms of workflow script. And by creating a Git repository that houses it and then push that Git repo into Jenkins. So the kind of like deploying into Heroku, you can push these definitions into Jenkins through Git push. Then suddenly your Jenkins would understand what the ACME service build process is, and then you can follow it. And then so that's one important puzzle of this. So in this way, if you have a lots of repositories that are built and tested in the same way, then it really drastically makes it easier for you to manage uniformity and consistency, right? You don't have to cut and paste these things every time over. And if you need to change the use case, change the definition of the pipeline, you do it once and everyone will automatically follow the new process. So, in large organizations, the release engineering often wants to maintain this kind of consistency, like maintain the centralized control so that the people don't start doing some crazy stuff left and right. So this would be a great tool to do it. And then while maintaining that central control, it also really makes it easier for busy product developers to use the pipeline without being a Jenkins expert. So I think that's a convincing story here. And then so with something like this, I think we can make the pipeline in Jenkins as easy as this 1, 2, 3. So one, you create this Jenkins file, a file named Jenkins file inside your source tree, and then put that one line, right? So, this is just gonna follow another one of those ACME service build process. And then so just put that one line, and then they commit that and then create the job in Jenkins and then specify the repository. But now that I think about it, well, maybe we can actually make it even better, right? So maybe the 3-step isn't easy enough, which is what we've been worked on. And this is, I think, one of the key parts of Jenkins 2.0 that I wanted to demo. So let's see. I need to do this in one hand. But so here's the Jenkins. And let's a little bigger. So to make this easier, what we created is this new thing called thank you. The organization folder is I have a GitHub organization called the Cloud Beers. So my company is called Cloud Bees, but as a demo, we created this Cloud Beers, the hypothetical beer company. And then so, I think many people are like that, right? How many of you? Quite a few. So what we can do in Jenkins, we create what we call the organization folder, GitHub organizations, and then basically tell Jenkins that, well, all my source code are in this Cloud Beers organizations, and then here's my, I need some credential to scan this repository. So I'll just do that. And then so what now the Jenkins is going to do is about the location of the organization. It started to scan all your repositories and all the branches and looking for interesting Jenkins file to build. So after a while, now it already discovers some interesting the branches and so on. And after a while, it's ready. It's all pre-configured to do the right things. So this is the one, the project, multi-branch demo project in which I have some build definition. It's called Jenkins file. So this is so it's actually defining a custom vocabulary, right? So let's say, well, our company has a standard build process. Let's say that involves I don't know, maybe in this case, well, this is a Go project, so I don't know what that is, but let's say maybe it's just building a Maven project and deploying it into the art factory or something. So as a product developer, I don't need to know that, but I can specify some key configuration parameters to get that going. So here, I think in this build, I'm saying that, well, our build is going to run inside a Docker container called the Golang, the version 1.50, and this is the actual build process to run in, and you can do some extra stuff afterward. So now what I could do is, for example, just by registering that hookup once, if I make the change to the source code, so let's see. So this is in which my Spanish ability is tried. So I think something like this, no? Oh yeah, just saying. And then if there's commit this change to the branch, and then Jenkins will automatically notice that, oh well, the new change has come in, and it's building the new build. And then you see that this is a new workflow staging view. So this is the part of Jenkins 2.0, in which you can see how the builds are progressing through different stages. So this is, I guess, it consists of a stage that checks out the source code and doing the build and some post-processing. So it's much easier as a user of Jenkins to use it this way. Like, I didn't have to do any configuration whatsoever, aside from that first time that the administrator set this up. Or I guess let's try something else. So if I'm going to create the change, let's say in a different, let me create a pull request. So I'm going to make some scary changes that I'm not comfortable. Maybe, sorry about that. So I'm going to make some change to the build script that I'm not too comfortable with. So let's say going back to the earlier versions. So instead of just committing it directly, I could create I'm supposed to fork it. Sorry, I messed up the sequence. So I'm going to work on this project, but now I'm going to do some risky changes. So the first thing I'm going to do is to fork this repository, right? Oh, and then I guess I have already forked it. And then so now I'm going to get to this branch, my repository, and then I make some scary changes here. So maybe so going back into some earlier version of the Golang runtime. So this is actually interesting because I'm changing the container used to do the build. And then so if Jenkins is building this, then it's going to be using my container. So again, as a product developer, I don't have to ask the Jenkins administrator to install the new tool at the runtime. Right? I could just use the container that contains the right tool. So now that I made this change, I'm going to create a pull request. So where do I do this? So I think this is where I create the pull request. I'm breaking the build. So please can you check? And so if I submit this pull request, that's going to also tell Jenkins that, oh, there's another interesting things to build now. And then so it will pick up this pull request automatically. So the new pull request 11, and now it's building the changes. And then as the changes coming through, I guess now it's being tested. Let's see. All right. So when this is done, then it will automatically update the GitHub status according to the result of the build. So if I'm the maintainer, I can use this information to decide if I merge this change or not. So again, a lot of things like this now it's happening quite automatically without just by configuring the Jenkins once. Right? Or if I wanted to, let's say, create a new repository, so what I can do is, let's say I'm working on a new component now, so maybe I'm trying to do Barcelona 1, so I'm creating a new repository here, And then let's see, what I'm going to do is to check out the source code. All right. So let's add the Jenkins file in here. It could be anything, but so I'm specifying this instruction to do the build, right? Creating a new project. Then let's do git push. Okay. Push u, origin master. So I push this new file in, and then maybe I should create another project that's not meant to be built like this. So let's create like a Barcelona 2, and then here this is not meant to be built by Jenkins. And so I could just leave things like that. Yeah, I guess this one we can just leave empty. So again, the Jenkins should notice that, I have a new project that now needs to be built. So now it's happening, all the right things are happening automatically. So thank you. Yeah, so in this way, I think it's, yeah, I mean, what do you think, right? It really does make Jenkins a lot more automatic to use. Like, you don't have to go manually create these jobs in Jenkins. If you lose the state in Jenkins, you can recreate them very easily. So I think it moves the dial in a kind of like a right way. So I'm very excited about this functionality in Jenkins still, though, and I hope you like it. Okay, so that's the pipelines code part. Great, thank you. Right. Okay. So how do you test Jenkins file? Yeah, we have all these ideas, but we haven't built any of that. So there are a couple of ideas. Actually, can I show? So one, we have a so the Jenkins knows what functions are available in your installations and what parameters are there. And then so, for example, in modern IDEs like Eclipse and IntelliJ, they have a great DSL support for Groovy. So we wanted to generate this Groovy DSL definition so that these IDE can provide like a code completion and so on. So that's something we really want to work on. And then second, like we wanted to, I guess, come up with some kind of unit test story, like the one that by using the same metadata, we can kind of stub out all the workflow functions. Right? So that kind of gives you ability to like a dry run the whole thing. And then somebody else actually also wrote like a command line tool that actually it launches the entire Jenkins and lets you run your workflow script off the real one. So it's kind of like a crazy thing to do, but it does work. So yes, so those part it needs some more the work on our side. Our hope is that this doesn't turn into like, our hope is that even if your workflow script is fairly complicated, it will still be something like this, not like the 400 lines of massive script. So if that's the case, then I hope that will be a good enough story for the time being until we work on more sophisticated tooling. Yeah. Okay. All right. So the other thing that we want to kind of put front and center on is the container stories, aka the Docker. So the I guess so in the Docker, as you it's here in this week. So it's been really very disruptive technology for a lot of users, and we are also using Docker ourselves in the Jenkins project, right? So we started thinking about, what kind of things, what kind of integrations Jenkins needs to provide with Docker. And then because this is clearly becoming an important technology for many. So we started something simple. So, we need to use Jenkins to build a container and deploying it. So, that's obviously the trivial use case. One, you have the source tree on the left, and then every time some change comes in, you use Jenkins to build a container and publish. And it turns out that even something simple like this, we find a room of improvements for Jenkins. So, when you're publishing images to the repository, well, you need to have the right credential to be able to push it. And then so, we wrote a plugin that allows you to register that kind of credentials, and then Jenkins is managing that credential at the right place at the right time. So even if you have a cluster of build nodes, these credentials can be made available to the builds node as you are doing it. And then so we wrote those plugins and then put it into Docker Commons plugin. And this basically becomes the foundation plugin for all the other Docker plugins to basically share the same abstractions. Now, when we say building a container, most of the time, you're not building a container from scratch. You're building it from building it on top of another container. So it's actually more like this. You're basically transforming an existing container by adding more stuff on top of it and then producing a new container. So, in this kind of setup, you want to do the new build every time the source code changes. But just like that, you also want to be able to do the same process when the base image changes. So maybe, your company provides a standard, like a Tomcat image in which you're baking your app on, or things like that. When the base image updates, because let's say they're upgrading to new version of Tomcat, then you also want to be able to building it. So to do it, it turned out that we need to add a new notification plugin. So the Docker they have a hook API that allows us Jenkins to notice when the new image arrives. So we wrote a plugin that allows you to say, please trigger this job every time the new image gets pushed into Docker Hub. So that's also available in the community. Now, if you are building containers, often the next step is you need to kind of group together these containers and then validate that particular combination, aka the integration testing. So let's say in the Jenkins community where we create this Docker container for various services that we run. So there's one for Jira, and then there's one for LDAP. Now, when we are upgrading Jira, we want to be able to test that Jira container before we put that into production. So, and then testing that container requires us running also some other things like LDAP to be able to make sure that the authentication works correctly. So, so this is a kind of another use case for the Jenkins, so putting these, the multiple containers together, and then often, if they work successfully, then you want to, quote unquote, promote these containers so that they have this stamp of approval that this particular combination has worked well. And then so that now it goes to the staging environment or production environment. So, these are basically the building blocks of the container pipeline process. And then you can imagine that, with this kind of primitives, you can quickly put together a very sophisticated graph of the work. So at the upstream, you have individual containers built from the source tree and into the individual apps. And somewhere in the middle, they get brought together, being tested at some lightly. And then if the particular combination is promoted, then now you want to deploy it into the staging environment and maybe run more expensive set of the soak testing, and at the end of it, you want to have a human. You want to have a big red button that deploys it into the production environment. So you can put together this kind of pipeline, and it start to look like some kind of a logistics facility where you have these a conveyor belts going on left and right, and then these packages or the containers are running on top of it. And then in various places, all these humans are stationed, and then they are looking at things and they're deciding whether to reject those things or let them into the next stage. So in case of Jenkins, those are not humans, but I guess they are more for there's some kind of processing or testing that happens. But you get the idea. So we are defining those primitives as the Jenkins plugins, and then you can define the pipeline as a whole by using this the workflow and pipeline as a code functionality that I just mentioned earlier. So now, once you get to this kind of the continuous delivery pipeline by using containers, one of the challenges become evident, which is also kind of evident if you look at this picture, is there are too many things flying around, and then it gets difficult to keep track of what container contains which build of that app, right? Because there's all these commits are coming in, and it takes long time for those to go through the pipeline. So let's say by the time the staging environment blows up, right, you need to know, well, what was in there. And then so to solve that problem, actually, and then this is also complicated by the fact that with Dockers, the name of the images change all the time because it's kind of tied to the repository in which it gets pushed to. So if you're doing the promotion by moving them through the different repositories, then it has to change the name. And then the tags, like the latest, they change what they point to all the time. And then so we need so we need a way to track these containers as they go through the pipeline. And then that's the sort of like basically what we did. And then by using this like a fingerprint tracking. So, in the postal services, the way they solve this problem is by attaching like a barcode or some kind of ID into each packet, right? So as they go through this, the facilities and go into the truck and get somewhere else, they can constantly scan these boxes. So if you order something to Amazon, you can see which facility it is currently at and on what leg of transit it is currently on. So we can do the same thing with containers and Jenkins. So we built that as a Docker traceability plugins. So what this does, is that it identifies each container by using its unique container ID. And every time you use it in somewhere, maybe you launch it for the purpose of testing, or maybe you built it. So Jenkins keeps a record of which build of which job it showed up. And then, Jenkins also keeps track of the changelog, right? So you can see what commit has gone into it. It remembers what was the git SHA-1 hash of the source code that went into this container. So it creates this basically database of mass surveillance. And then so if things blow up in the staging environment, well, we can see that, this container, it's created out of this base container, which came from this job, so build 134, which contains a commit from Kosuke that made on a Wednesday, 3 p.m. And then so now they know where to track me down and basically they tell me to fix it. So that's we built the starting point of it as a Docker traceability plugin. And we actually got a lot more work to do in this space to really create more comprehensive story out of it. But we are laying the foundation for this kind of things. So and then there's also a whole set of use cases around using Docker as a build environment, right? So you might not be using container as a unit of deployment, but you might still benefit from being able to run your build inside the container so that you can control your tooling. So you can keep your slave clean and then throw it away every time the build is done or things like that. So that's the kind of the quick the walkthrough of the Docker stories that we've been building. But anyway, so today I talked about Jenkins 2.0, also the overall broader pitch about what we are trying to do in the community, and then some of the key functionalities in there, the pipeline as code, the workflow, and the Docker support, and so on. And then I guess the user experience that I showed you in the demo. So, but there are a lot more work needs to be done, and also I'm really interested in hearing about what people think about whether we are working on the right problem. So, it's really great to hear from you that the website isn't that important. So that's the kind of feedback I'm trying to bring back. So I'm looking for the help from people in terms of contributing to the conversations or helping us move this effort forward. I think that's basically the slide deck that I prepared. So, if there are more questions, I'm happy to take. Okay. Right. Yeah. So, yes. So you just see them as an independent track, and that's true. And just for the record, we are not waiting on anything. So, I mean, the reason I couldn't demo it and I only showed you the screencast is it's really not currently in any demoable state. So, yes. But it does, when we try to rally the community around, it kind of helps to have this broader story. When I'm just saying, well, we're going to redo the plugin website, and then that's one thing. But if I'm saying it's just we are doing it in the context of this broader effort, it kind of helps to explain why we are doing it and why it's important. And then so sometimes I think it's anyway. So yeah, but I understand your point. So thanks for that. Right. So how do we get to 2.0? So so we created a branch, and then all these changes we intend to put into the 2.0 branch, and then we want to make the builds and so on available. But and then we want to keep the 1.x branch in 1.x development in parallel. So people who have a production Jenkins instance that needs to be up and running, they can still get the 1.x branch. And then, the developers of the 2.x effort doesn't have to worry so much about the new change landing in is going to create like a massive havoc. And then but at the end of the release, then we expect to like really flip the switch and then everything will become 2.0 focused. Yeah. Okay. I guess I still got a lot of t-shirts. So what should we do? Maybe like in the America? Okay. I can do like a rock, paper, scissors too. Yes. Right. So what about like if you have a freestyle project, what does it take to export them into this pipeline? It's called Jenkins file. So there's actually, I think, the work being attempted to create this kind of export functionality. And it might not work all the time, but if it works for some basic cases and it spits out the error, then that's actually kind of useful, right? So that's actually being worked on or almost getting worked on. Yeah, so that's in the pipeline. Right. So for the plugin that's not supported, I'd expect the wizard to say, "Well, this plugin doesn't work today. Please press this button so that we can know." I think that's what we are. And we need to kind of prioritize what to work on first. So getting that information is also useful. Yeah. So that's my current plan. All right. One last question. Anyone to kind of wrap this up nicely? No? All right. I guess that's it then. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kosuke. It was a really good first presentation and opening for our meetup. The level is really high. And just about I wrap up and we are going to the pizza that is there. I'm sure that you are very, very hungry. Oops. I also, like Kosuke, I also wanted to have feedback from you because this is going to be a recurrent meetup. Well, the guys, the organizer, if you can come to the stage. And so we would like to hear a little bit from you. We have some talks prepared, and we would like to continue. We have maybe one or two suggestions, and we would like to hear from you. Like, what would you like to in this meetup to be talked about, to be discussed? So we are open either now if you want to shout out what you think, or in the meetup group, or in the Twitter. We have a Twitter account, Barcelona Jam, and yes, I will pass. Well, I didn't present myself. Sorry, my name is Jorge Peña. Here is Victor Martinez and Ferran Arnau. And yes, I also this is off the meetup. It's a little bit of marketing. We have two positions for build and configuration engineers here at King, and whoever wants to talk more, we are happy to discuss it. And so I pass the microphone to the co-organizers to continue.
There's not much to say, but we already have a mailing list here in Barcelona, so you can check that in the Google groups. You will see there. So it's an open discussion. We have different ideas like configuration as code, pipeline as code, or how you can encourage people to use these best practices according to our experience. But we are open to discuss, so you are free to just grab the microphone and prepare any discussion or talk or anything like that. So we want you just to be part of this. So yeah, nothing else to say. So thank you. Yeah, you want to say? No. So let's go to the pizza and just thank you for coming.